Hello YouTube, this is Dr. Bass here. I'm going to attempt to restore a 1983 Mercury outboard with no experience whatsoever. I've done a bit of research and this is my attempt at a restoration. So thank you for joining me. This is day one.
This motor was given to me by a 91-year-old man who said 4 years ago that it was working. I can tell now that the lower unit is seized up on it, but that doesn't mean it won't work. I also know that the engine will run as long as it's in neutral, and I'm able to put it in neutral, and I can tell, as far as I can tell, the mechanism on the side here works, and it appears to be in neutral. I've learned that these Mercury outboards, at least the 83, has an internal sort of transmission to it. And what this does is when you turn the throttle here, it engages this mechanism to put it into gear. So as long as I have it in neutral, as it shows there, what that means is I can still attempt to get the engine going before I even mess with the lower unit and figure out why it is that the lower unit isn't turning. So the first thing I want to do that is, before I mess with anything, I just want to kind of see if there's a spark coming to the spark plug. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the two spark plugs here. Okay, so I've removed the spark plugs just using a crescent wrench. They're not in too far that you can't use a crescent wrench. I don't need a socket to do this. I also noticed right away that these spark plugs don't have a gap on them. I've never seen a spark plug like that. I don't know anything about that, so that's something I'll look into. But now I'm going to check to see if they have a spark by go ahead in attaching them back to the wire. Alright, so I did a little research, and these are actually a thing, gapless spark plugs. You'll notice there's no gap on that spark plug. I also can see that I've got a spark. I'm going to try to duplicate it for you. What I've done is just put the spark plug right down. You want to make sure you're contacting some sort of ground. I'll try to hold the camera and pull at the same time. I'm not quite sure if anyone can see that, but it does spark. You'll see a little blue flicker right there. Okay, so now that I know I have a spark, the next thing I want to do is make sure all my fuel lines are cleaned out. So this is going to take a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is work on this old fuel can here. I took it to the landfill to empty out all the old fuel from it. So it's empty right now, but the next thing I want to do is add alcohol to it to clean it out. And they say you should rest it for about 30 minutes. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to clean out the fuel lines and some of the things I went to pick up today at Walmart and Home Depot to do this little project are denatured alcohol, some latex gloves, some two-stroke oil because this is a two-stroke engine. It's going to require a 50-to-1 fuel mixture with the gasoline to be added together into the tank when it's ready, when it's clean. I also got a funnel, an oil pan, and this little spray bottle because it was recommended to me by a boat mechanic to spray the oil fuel mixture once it's done, to spray a little bit of it right into right behind the spark plugs and then around the back into the carburetor, which is right here. That's going to be a while until I get to that. So for right now, I'm going to work on cleaning out, adding that denatured alcohol to the fuel tank. Okay, really quickly, one of the things I forgot to mention is it's good to do this in a well-ventilated area. So I'm actually outside using my shed to store the outboard, but I'm actually outside doing this. I've put all of the denatured alcohol into the tank as much as I had. I think this is a gallon. Yeah, it's a gallon. They recommend 2 gallons, but since this tank is not very big, I think this is a 6-gallon tank, 6.1. What I'm going to do is just shake it up and then let it sit in there for a half hour, and I'm going to then go, well, that's sitting, work on my pull cord right there to make sure it's oiled properly so I don't rip it out. Okay, so now I have the denatured alcohol just sitting for about a half hour in the fuel tank to clean it out, and I'll filter that out here in a moment. But while that's sitting, I'm going to add some lithium grease to any of the sort of moving parts that I can see on the outboard right now. And one of the things I want to do is actually remove the top here to make sure the cord is okay. You can see that, you know, it's reluctant to go back, but it still seems to be working okay. I just want to make sure it's lubed up properly for the pool. I've heard that white lithium grease is fine to use for this sort of thing. The other thing is PB Blaster. I've noticed is something that people use. I believe that has lithium grease on it. I'm no expert though, so do consult an actual mechanic. Alright, I've been applying the lithium grease to different spots. You can see it sticks pretty well. You can see the white part where the grease is. One of the things that I noticed right away when I got the outboard was that it won't tilt. You know, you have these little grease plugs on it here. I have to get some grease. I'm going to borrow from a buddy of mine, just marine grease for those to hopefully get it to tilt. In the meantime, what I've done is sprayed some of that grease around here just to see if that might loosen it up. But right now it's not tilting at all, but it does. I won't do it too much because I've got it sitting on that brick down there to take some pressure off the horse that it's on right now. This thing's heavy. If I had to guess, it's probably between 80 and 100 pounds. I can carry it by myself, but it's not fun. So if I move, you can see it'll steer just fine. That seems to be loose, working fine. It'll go all the way, both ways, but it's not tilting at all. So hopefully I can get it to tilt by perhaps getting some grease in there, or hopefully maybe the lithium grease will do it. Okay, so I'm going to work on removing the top here to get underneath this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the top. I don't know what any of these parts are called, but there you go. Okay, so I've managed to remove the pull start here, the cable, to get underneath it so I can look and see if there's anything I can grease. One of the things I had to do was, because this is all attached, was I removed this, I think it's called like a fuel line adapter, and I had to buy a new one because it was cracked. So I went to a local place called Budget Boats here in Virginia Beach, and I picked up, this was the old piece here, the adapter for the fuel line, which is actually right here. This is the old fuel line. I'm hoping it works. I'll have to clean it out in a bit. And I picked up this new one for $5. So that will eventually go back over here onto this. And because this is all attached, what I had to do was remove this hose from what I believe is this little thing here. I think that's a fuel pump. And so I just took off the hose clamp, removed that, and this whole thing can now come off. So there we are. Okay, so note to self. You see this little screw hole here and that screw? Don't remove that screw unless you want to give yourself a lot of work. What I feared was actually the case. That was the tensioner attached to the spring up underneath, so I've lost all tension in the pull cord, and now I've got to figure out how to get that back working again. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken this screw out of the top, which had this plate underneath it like that. So I've taken that out. You'll notice there's a little spring on it. You want to keep those together. And then this then slides out, your cord slides out, and underneath that is the spring, and you'll notice this little part here, which most likely would have connected to that screw that I just removed. So I'm going to put the screw back through, attach this, and then sort of figure out how that latches to the spinning mechanism so that I can get the tension back in it. Okay, you can now see I've got the screw back in it, holding one end of the spring, and now I'm going to hopefully attempt to crank it down once I put it back together, and then spin it back in place, hopefully now with tension in it. Notice this little mechanism blocks it here. It clicks on these teeth to hold it in place. Okay, one of the things that I've discovered as I'm trying to put this back on is it won't drop flush unless you've got this here, this gap here, and this gap here lined up with this offset point here and here. Okay, I've got it back in place. It's always good to take pictures of something before you take it apart. Fortunately, I did take a picture of it and realized I had put this plate on upside down. So it is important to take note of those sorts of things to make sure you're doing things right. There's no tension in it yet. So what my plan is to begin to spin it, but leave the cord disengaged from it right now and maybe wrap the cord in later. I'm not quite sure how to do this yet, but first thing I'm going to do is put tension in it and then get the cord adjusted accordingly. Okay, yes, this is how you do it. So there's no tension in it right now. You'll notice I've undone the cord so it's not actually, it can just rotate with the mechanism. So what I'm going to do is put all the tension in it right now, load it up with tension, and when it's all the way loaded up, I'm going to put the cord down here and allow it to then, just as if I were to pull it all the way out, that's when it's loaded all the way up, and then when I let it go, it's going to draw the cord back in. So I want to load it up, put all the weight on it, so when it releases, it'll then absorb the cord back into it. Okay, so what I've done is got all the tension in it. I put the cord back right here, you can see it. And what I'm going to do, you see the cord, it's as if I pulled the cord all the way out of it. And now I'm going to slowly release it as if I just pulled it to allow it to hopefully the tension to draw that cord all the way back into it. Hopefully, if it's working appropriately. So it's still going, and there we go. Done. So what I did do was I greased the sort of joint in here when I had it off. I think any marine grade grease works fine with that. So even though I didn't want to remove that, it was probably good to be able to grease it. And hopefully I've got all the tension out of it I need. I did crank it all the way, so hopefully that's actually helpful. And I've learned a lot. I've learned what to do and what not to do. Okay, I've set my pull start to the side, and what I'm going to do now is dump out the alcohol from the old gas tank back into the alcohol container down here. Again, this is called denatured alcohol. This is what I read was recommended to clean out a old gas tank. Why this sock, this dirty, nasty sock? Well, it serves two purposes. The main purpose is that it actually is going to filter this as I'm dumping it out. So I want to reuse this denatured alcohol. I want to do this one more time, and then I also want to use it to actually pump and use the fuel line to clean the fuel line out when it's actually hooked up. To make sure to get any sediment out of that. So I'm preserving the denatured alcohol by filtering it. The other function it serves is just to tell me how nasty it actually is. If there's a bunch of stuff that I see, I'm obviously going to want to do this over again. So I'm going to go ahead and empty this out into the funnel and back into the container. Okay, so I've emptied it all out, and the sock, you'll notice, looks pretty clean. That's the end of it where it was running through. There's really it's not too bad. So those flakes, those black flakes you see there and there, were when I was flipping the gas tank upside down. It was from the actually the outside of the tank. So I'm not too worried. It seems pretty clean in there. I am going to put it in one more time so that I can then pump it out through the actual hose now. So that's the next step, to clean the hose out and let some more of that sit in there while I'm cleaning the hose out. So I'm going to be transferring the denatured alcohol back in This stuff I've already filtered through twice, so I put the sock on the end of the funnel again, just to make sure if there is any junk in there that it's not going back into the gas can. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I've done my best to clean out the ends on the fuel line here. This thing clips onto the receiver there. And so I've cleaned these up as best as possible. And what I want to do is, you'll see that on your pump here, it's got that arrow to tell you which direction, obviously, the flow of gas is doing. But what I want to do is firstly fill this line up by pumping it. So I'm going to attach it, and what I'm going to do is actually pump out the alcohol into the hose and let it sit there for a while, and then really just pump a lot of it through it to clean it out. And that way I know my tank then and my fuel line are clean. And again, I'll put the sock on the end, on the opposite end, which is in my hand here, that this is going to go up to the engine eventually, to the outboard. But for right now, the goal is to fill this up with alcohol and let it sit for about a half hour, and then finish draining it. Okay, so I've got this hooked up, I've clipped it on there, got my hose running into the bucket here, and what I'm going to do is just squeeze this, and as I squeeze here, you can see the alcohol coming out there. So I'm running it through to clean out this fuel line. All that sediment in the bottom isn't actually coming out of the tank. It's from the outside of the tank, like I said earlier. So just to ensure that I've got alcohol throughout the fuel line and I'm gonna let it sit here for a half hour, what I've done is sort of lifted this up and just hooked it, fit well into this lock on my shed. So it's going uphill to hold all that in it, and what I've done is just pumped it until I saw some coming out at the top, and then let it sit for about a half hour, and we'll be done with that. Before I go ahead and reattach the pull start to it, I'm gonna, not that you need to, it doesn't make a difference, but I'm gonna remove the fuel filter here off the back, so I can clean that out as well, just to make sure it's clean. I've already looked at it, it's pretty clean, but I'm gonna run some alcohol through that as well. Well, there's the fuel filter and it looks pretty clean. You'll notice inside here there's a little bit of sediment in the bottom, so I'm gonna run that through the alcohol and just put a Q-tip through it to clean it out. So as you can see, I've cleaned that out pretty good. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and reattach it. Okay, so I'm just about done for the day. It's getting dark out. I've put the spark plugs back in temporarily so that nothing gets in the engine. That would not be good. I've just attached the used part that I found here, the gas line, cleaned that out, so that'll be ready to go. My hope is to have everything cleaned out by tomorrow. What I'm going to do now to close up is just to empty out the tank, make sure the fuel line's free of alcohol, and let those just sit overnight, so that, and I'll leave the tank open and inside so it dries out, and hopefully then tomorrow we can try to start it. Okay, just about done here for the evening, and this fuel line adapter needs to screw into this hole here. Just one side of it sits in that hole, and the previous owner had it to where this was facing downward through the hole so that the nut was out at the bottom, but it's not supposed to go that way. When it is, it hits the arm mechanism here. It's not that big of a deal, but I wanted to flip it around because there's less space on the head of this screw, so I can run it up this way, the proper way. I had to remove the arm here, the steering mechanism and throttle. To do that, I just took these big screws out, and so now I can run this screw up through the bottom.
Thanks for listening, YouTubers. Feel free to leave me comments, particularly if you really know what you're doing. Again, this is all new to me, so I'm open to suggestions and help as along the way. Thank you.